The candlelight caught her eyes as she whispered the words that would haunt me forever. "Your brother didn't die in France. He was murdered right here, in this very ballroom. My name is Lord Garrett Blackwood, second son of the Earl of Ravensholm, and at 26 years of age, I had seen enough of war and death to last several lifetimes. I had returned from the Peninsula campaigns only 3 months prior, my uniform traded for the elegant dark blue tailcoat and silver-buttoned waistcoat expected of a gentleman in society. But nothing, not even the horrors of battle, had prepared me for that October evening at Ashbourne Manor when a maid's confession would unravel everything I believed about my family's honor. The grand ballroom sparkled with the light of 300 beeswax candles, their warm glow reflecting off crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors that had witnessed decades of aristocratic gatherings. Ladies in silk gowns of emerald and sapphire swept across the floor in perfect harmony with gentlemen in dark tailcoats, while the string quartet played a gentle minuet from their position near the towering windows. Outside, the October wind rattled the glass panes, a reminder that autumn was surrendering to winter's embrace. I stood near one of those windows, watching the dancing couples while nursing a glass of the Duke's finest port, when I first noticed her. Unlike the other servants who moved like shadows through the ballroom, invisible to the dancing aristocracy, this particular maid met my gaze directly. Her eyes were the color of summer storms, gray with flecks of silver that seemed to catch the candlelight, and there was an intelligence there that surprised me. Most servants knew better than to look upon their betters with such boldness. She was perhaps 22, with auburn hair tucked neatly beneath a white cap, wearing the simple gray dress and crisp white apron that marked her as personal maid to one of the grand ladies present. But when she whispered, "Where are you watching from tonight?" as she passed near my alcove while attending to her mistress's fallen fan, I caught something in her voice that didn't belong to a woman of her station. Education. Refinement hidden beneath the careful deference required of her position. "I'm curious about you as well," I thought to myself, intrigued by this enigma in servant's clothing. It had been 18 months since my elder brother Marcus had disappeared during what we were told was a diplomatic mission to France. 18 months of unanswered questions, of official letters that said nothing while promising everything, of sleepless nights wondering if the heir to our family's title was truly dead, or merely lost in the chaos of European politics. The music swelled as I watched her move through the crowd with practiced grace, and I found myself following her path around the ballroom's perimeter. She was collecting empty glasses and straightening chairs with the efficiency expected of her role, but her eyes never stopped moving, observing, cataloging details that most servants wouldn't dare notice. When she paused near the massive fireplace, adjusting a silver candlestick on the mantelpiece, I approached. "Excuse me," I said softly, not wanting to draw attention from the nearby dancers who were concluding an elaborate country dance. "The candlestick appears to be perfectly straight already." She turned to face me fully, and I saw her hands tremble slightly before she steadied them against her apron. "My lord," she replied with a curtsy that was neither too deep nor too shallow, perfectly calculated to show respect without subservience. "I was merely ensuring everything remained pristine for His Grace's guests." Her voice carried the faintest trace of something that didn't match her position. Not quite accent, but an inflection that spoke of books read by candlelight, of conversations that extended beyond the mundane concerns of domestic service. "What is your name?" I asked, genuinely curious about this young woman who seemed to exist in two worlds simultaneously. "Miss Lydia Fairmont, my lord. I serve as personal maid to Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashbourne." The storm outside chose that moment to intensify, sending a gust of cold air through the ancient window frames that made several nearby candles flicker dramatically. The dancing shadows across her face gave her an almost ethereal quality, and I found myself drawn to the mystery she represented. "Tell me, Miss Fairmont," I said, lowering my voice as another group of dancers swept past us, "do you enjoy these grand gatherings?" Her gray eyes studied my face carefully before she answered, as if weighing the wisdom of honesty against the safety of expected responses. "They are magnificent spectacles, my lord," she finally said. "Though sometimes I wonder about the stories that unfold beyond the music and laughter." An interesting observation, I replied, impressed by her diplomatic answer. And what stories do you imagine might be hidden in such a setting? That's when she glanced around quickly, ensuring we weren't overheard, and stepped slightly closer to the warmth of the fireplace. The candlelight danced across her features as she spoke, and her next words would change the course of my entire life. Stories of secrets that powerful men would kill to protect, my lord. Stories that some believed died in foreign lands but actually ended much closer to home. My blood chilled at her implication, and not from the autumn wind seeping through the windows. Are you speaking of something specific, Miss Fairmont, or merely sharing philosophical musings about the nature of society gatherings? She looked directly into my eyes then, and I saw courage there that took my breath away. Most women of any station, faced with a lord's direct questioning, would retreat into safe pleasantries. Instead, Lydia Fairmont took a step that would prove either very brave or very foolish. Your brother, Lord Marcus Blackwood, she whispered so quietly I had to lean closer to hear her words above the music. He never made it to France, my lord. He never left England at all. The port glass in my hand nearly slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers. The warmth from the fireplace couldn't touch the ice that spread through my veins as I processed what she had just revealed. How could you possibly know anything about my brother's mission? I managed to ask, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Because I was there the night he died, she replied with a steadiness that belied the magnitude of her confession. And I know who killed him, and why. But if you're enjoying this evening of romance and mystery, show your support by sharing your thoughts in the comments below, because what I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you believe about honor, family, and the price of truth. The string quartet concluded their piece with a flourish, and in the momentary silence before applause began, I heard only the thundering of my own heartbeat and the whisper of autumn wind against the windows. When she whispered what she knew about my brother, the blood drained from my face like water from a broken vessel. The applause from the concluded dance provided perfect cover for what happened next. Miss Fairmont reached into the folds of her apron and withdrew a small piece of folded parchment, pressing it into my palm with fingers that trembled despite her steady voice. "Meet me in the library at midnight," she whispered urgently. "The second shelf from the window, behind the collection of Byron's works. There's something you must see before I can tell you the rest." Before I could respond, she melted back into the crowd of servants, leaving me standing by the fireplace with more questions than answers and a piece of paper that felt as dangerous as a loaded pistol in my pocket. The Duke of Ashbourne's voice boomed across the ballroom, announcing the next dance, and I watched as couples arranged themselves for a quadrille, their laughter and conversation creating a stark contrast to the turmoil raging in my mind. I excused myself from the festivities, claiming a need for fresh air, though the storm outside made such an excuse nearly laughable. Instead, I retreated to the morning room, where heavy curtains muffled the sounds of celebration and I could examine Lydia's note in private. Her handwriting was elegant, far too refined for a servant, and the message itself sent another chill down my spine. "The letter that destroyed your brother is hidden where only I could find it. Trust no one else with this knowledge. If something happens to me before midnight, look for the truth behind the false wall in the blue guest chamber. Your brother died trying to protect you all." The remainder of the evening passed in a haze of forced pleasantries and meaningless conversation. I danced with Lady Catherine Pembroke, the Duke's niece, whose conversation about the latest London fashions felt surreal against the backdrop of my racing thoughts. I exchanged pleasantries with Lord Hartwell about the weather and the state of the roads, all while my mind churned with possibilities about what Lydia had discovered and why she was risking her position, perhaps even her life, to share it with me. As the grandfather clock in the great hall chimed 11:30, I began making my excuses to leave the ballroom. The storm had settled into a steady rhythm against the windows, and many of the candles had burned low, casting longer shadows across the marble floor. The Duke, resplendent in his burgundy velvet coat, accepted my thanks for the evening's hospitality with the gracious condescension of a man accustomed to entertaining lesser nobility. The library was located in the west wing of the manor, accessible through a series of corridors lined with portraits of Ashbourne ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow my progress through the dimly lit passages. My footsteps echoed softly on the worn carpet runners as I made my way past drawing rooms and unused guest chambers, each one filled with dust covers and memories of grander times. The library itself was a testament to generations of scholarly pursuits, with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes that spoke of education, culture, and wealth accumulated over centuries. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, supplementing the light from my single candle and creating an atmosphere that was both intimate and mysterious. The smell of old books and beeswax filled the air, along with something else, a faint trace of rose water that told me I was not the first to arrive. I found the Byron collection exactly where Lydia had indicated, and behind the slim volumes of romantic poetry, my fingers encountered what felt like a leather portfolio tied with ribbon. The moment I touched it, I heard her voice from the shadows near the window seat where heavy curtains provided perfect concealment. "You came," she said, stepping into the circle of candlelight with a grace that belonged in drawing rooms rather than servants' quarters. "I wasn't certain you would." The gravity in her voice told me this was no simple revelation about household gossip or minor indiscretions. This was something that had cost her sleep and perhaps more. "Tell me everything," I said, settling the portfolio on the reading table between us while maintaining enough distance to preserve propriety, though propriety seemed a small concern given the circumstances. She moved closer, and I could see that she had changed from her servant's dress into a simple but well-made gown of dark green wool that complemented her eyes and revealed the natural elegance she had been forced to hide beneath her station's requirements. Her auburn hair was no longer confined by a servant's cap but fell in soft waves around her shoulders, transforming her from an intriguing servant into a genuinely beautiful woman whose intelligence shone as brightly as her physical appeal. "Your brother was not the man you believed him to be," she began, her fingers tracing the leather of the portfolio as if drawing courage from its surface. "But he was also far better than anyone gave him credit for. The diplomatic mission to France was a fabrication, my lord. Marcus never left England because he had discovered something that certain powerful men would kill to keep hidden." My heart hammered against my ribs as she untied the ribbon and opened the portfolio to reveal a collection of letters, documents, and what appeared to be financial records. The paper was expensive, the kind used by men of influence for correspondence that carried weight in government circles. But it was the seal on one particular document that made my breath catch in my throat, a seal I recognized from letters that had arrived at our family estate throughout my childhood. These documents prove that several members of Parliament, including men your father considered trusted friends, have been selling military intelligence to French agents for the past 3 years, she continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "Your brother discovered the conspiracy quite by accident, while reviewing financial records for your father's business interests in London. The diplomatic mission was invented to explain his sudden disappearance after he confronted them with evidence of their treason." I stared at the papers spread before us, recognizing names that had dined at our table, men who had expressed concern for our family's welfare after Marcus's supposed death, individuals who had offered their condolences while knowing full well they were responsible for creating the need for such sympathy. "How did you come to possess these documents?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer would complicate everything I thought I knew about the young woman sitting across from me. "Because Lord Marcus trusted me with them the night he died," she replied, and for the first time, her voice cracked with emotion. "Because he knew that a servant, especially a female servant, could move through powerful households without being noticed or suspected. And because," she paused, looking down at her hands folded in her lap, "he loved me, and I loved him, despite the impossibility of such an attachment between a lord and a lady's maid." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, not because my brother had formed an inappropriate attachment, but because it explained so much about his behavior in the months before his disappearance. His increased trips to London, his distraction during family gatherings, his newfound interest in our father's business dealings, and most tellingly, his sudden concern for social justice and the welfare of common people. Love, I had learned from my own observations, could transform a man's entire worldview. But if you're feeling the same intrigue I felt that night, take a moment to like this story, because what Lydia revealed next would turn my world completely upside down and force me to question everything I had ever believed about family loyalty and the price of honor. The letter she pressed into my hand would change everything I believed about honor, and about the dangerous game my brother had been playing in the shadows of London society. The letter she withdrew from the bottom of the portfolio bore my brother's familiar handwriting, but the words contained within were unlike anything Marcus had ever written before. His usual confident script seemed hurried, almost frantic, as if he had been writing against time itself. My dearest Lydia, the letter began, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have been confirmed and I am likely beyond the reach of mortal help. The men I trusted have proven to be serpents, and I fear my investigation has placed not only myself but you and my entire family in mortal danger. I looked up at Lydia, who was watching my face intently as I read, her gray eyes reflecting the candlelight and something deeper, a pain that spoke of genuine loss rather than mere sympathy. Continue reading, she said softly. The worst is yet to come. The letter continued with details that made my blood run cold. Marcus had discovered that Lord Pemberton, a man who had been like an uncle to us throughout our childhood, was the mastermind behind the intelligence conspiracy. More shocking still, our own father had unknowingly provided cover for their activities through his legitimate business dealings with French merchants. The traitors had been using our family's shipping connections to pass information to Napoleon's agents, hiding their treachery behind the respectability of the Blackwood name. But it was Marcus's final paragraph that stopped my heart entirely. I have confronted Pemberton with the evidence, demanding he cease these activities immediately and make reparations to Crown and country. His response was to invite me to Ashbourne Manor for what he claimed would be a private discussion to resolve the matter quietly. I do not believe his intentions are honorable, my darling Lydia. If something befalls me, you must take these documents to Garrett. He is the only one I trust completely, the only one whose honor remains untouched by this corruption. Tell him that I died trying to protect our family name, but more importantly, tell him that I died having known the purest love possible between two souls, regardless of the circumstances that society would use to condemn us. My hands trembled as I set the letter aside, the implications crashing over me like waves during a storm. Pemberton had been at our estate just last month, expressing his condolences and offering to help manage our affairs in Marcus's absence. He had sat at our dining table, drunk our wine, and accepted our gratitude for his friendship, all while knowing he was responsible for my brother's death. He killed Marcus here, in this very manner, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And then he attended our family gathering to offer his sympathy for our loss. Lydia nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I was in the servants' quarters that night, 3 months ago, when I heard voices in the blue guest chamber. Your brother was staying there as Lord Pemberton's invited guest. I thought nothing of it at first, but then I heard raised voices, then a struggle, and finally, the most terrible sound I have ever heard, the sound of something heavy falling to the floor. The storm outside seemed to intensify as she continued her account, the wind howling around the manor's stone walls like the voices of the dead demanding justice. I waited until everything was quiet, then I crept to the chamber door. It was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I could see your brother lying motionless near the fireplace, blood pooling beneath his head. Lord Pemberton was standing over him, along with 2 other men I recognized as his associates from London. What did you do? I asked, though I was already amazed by her courage in circumstances that would have sent most people fleeing in terror. I hid and listened as they planned to dispose of his body and create the fiction of his diplomatic mission. They spoke of your brother, as if he were merely an inconvenience to be managed rather than a human being whose only crime was discovering their treachery. When they left to arrange for the body's removal, I slipped into the room and gathered these documents from his belongings before they could destroy the evidence. The candle between us flickered as a particularly strong gust rattled the library windows, and in the dancing light, I saw not just a servant who had witnessed the crime, but a woman whose love had given her the strength to preserve justice when all the powerful men around her had chosen corruption. Your courage astounds me, I said, meaning every word. But why wait 3 months to reveal this information? Why not go to the authorities immediately? Her laugh was bitter, filled with a pain that spoke of harsh lessons learned about the nature of power and justice. My lord, I am a servant. Who would believe my word against that of Lord Pemberton and his associates? Who would listen to accusations from a woman whose only proof was documents that could easily be dismissed as forgeries? I needed to wait for the right moment, the right person, someone with enough influence to ensure these men faced consequences for their crimes. And you believe I am that person, I said, though even as I spoke the words I recognized the terrible responsibility she was placing upon my shoulders. The second son of an earl, with no political connections of my own and no experience in matters of such grave import. You are Marcus's brother, she replied with a conviction that humbled me. You carry his blood, his honor, and his determination to see justice done. More than that, you are the only person who loved him as much as I did, the only one who will pursue this matter regardless of the personal cost. As she spoke, I found myself studying her face in the candlelight, seeing past the servant's deference she had worn like armor throughout our encounters. There was intelligence there, yes, but also strength, compassion, and a beauty that had nothing to do with her physical features and everything to do with the courage she had displayed in preserving my brother's legacy. For the first time in months, I felt something other than grief and confusion about Marcus's fate. I felt purpose, and surprisingly, I felt a stirring of attraction toward this remarkable woman who had risked everything to honor a dead man's memory. But our moment of connection was shattered by the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the library. Heavy boots on wooden floors, moving with the confidence of men who belonged in such places rather than the careful tread of servants about their duties. Lydia's eyes widened with fear, and she quickly began gathering the documents back into their portfolio. Someone is coming, she whispered urgently. They must not find us together, especially not with these papers. If they discover what I have shown you tonight, we will both share your brother's fate. The footsteps were growing closer, accompanied by low voices that carried the authority of men accustomed to being obeyed. I blew out our candle, plunging the library into moonlit shadows, and guided Lydia toward the window alcove where heavy curtains could provide concealment. As we pressed ourselves against the cold stone wall, her body warm against mine in the darkness, I realized that this woman had become more than just the keeper of my brother's secrets. She had become someone whose safety mattered to me in ways that had nothing to do with the information she possessed. The library door opened with a creak that seemed deafening in the silence, and what I discovered in my brother's room that night still haunts me, because the men who entered were not random intruders but people I had trusted with my family's welfare, people whose betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined possible. Lord Pemberton's voice carried clearly through the darkness as he entered the library with 2 other men whose footsteps I recognized from countless social gatherings. The Duke of Ashbourne himself, our gracious host, and Lord Hartwell, a man my father had considered one of his closest friends for over 20 years. Their casual conversation about the evening's entertainment felt obscene given what I now knew about their true activities. Excellent gathering tonight, Pemberton said, his tone filled with the satisfaction of a man whose plans were proceeding smoothly. The Blackwood boy suspects nothing, I assume. His presence here tonight provides perfect cover for what we must discuss. Lydia's breath was warm against my neck as we pressed deeper into the shadows of the window alcove, the portfolio of evidence clutched between us like a lifeline. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see the 3 men settling themselves around the reading table where moments before I had been learning the truth about my brother's murder. The Duke lit a candle from the embers in the fireplace, and the sudden illumination revealed faces I had known since childhood, now transformed into something sinister by the knowledge of their treachery. The shipment from Calais arrives next week, the Duke continued, spreading what appeared to be maps across the table. Our French contacts are particularly interested in the troop movements through Portsmouth. The information young Blackwood's shipping connections provided us last year proved invaluable for Napoleon's coastal strategy. My father's shipping business, the enterprise that had supported our family for generations, had been used as an unwitting tool in this conspiracy. The realization struck me like a physical blow, but it was nothing compared to what Lord Hartwell revealed next. Speaking of the Blackwood family, he said with casual indifference to human suffering, we may need to consider the younger son's continued existence. He's been asking too many questions about Marcus's disappearance, and his military experience makes him potentially dangerous if he discovers the truth. Pemberton waved dismissively, but his next words chilled me to the bone. Garrett is a romantic fool, much like his brother. If he becomes problematic, a riding accident, or a duel over some imagined slight would surprise no one. Military men are notoriously prone to violence and poor judgment. Their casual discussion of my potential murder, delivered in the same tone they might use to discuss the weather or the quality of the evening's wine, revealed the complete absence of humanity in these men I had once respected. But it was their next topic of conversation that made Lydia's grip on my arm tighten with renewed fear. What of the servant girl? The Duke asked, his voice taking on a more serious tone. The one who attended Marcus during his stay here. She's been asking subtle questions about that night, and I've noticed her watching us with unusual attention during social gatherings. She knows something, Hartwell agreed grimly. Her behavior has been different since Marcus's death, more cautious, more observant. We should have eliminated that potential complication months ago. Pemberton stood and began pacing near the fireplace, his shadow dancing across the walls like some malevolent spirit. The girl is a problem, but a manageable one. An unfortunate accident in the servants' quarters, perhaps a fall down the back stairs during her duties, would attract little attention. Servants die from such mishaps regularly, and no one investigates too thoroughly when the deceased is merely a lady's maid. My blood boiled at their casual planning of Lydia's murder, but I forced myself to remain still, knowing that discovery at this moment would mean death for both of us. Beside me, I could feel Lydia's trembling, whether from fear or rage I could not determine, but her courage in maintaining our concealment impressed me even as my protective instincts screamed for action. The timing must be perfect, the Duke continued, apparently the strategic mind behind their operations. We cannot afford any connection between the girl's death and our activities. Perhaps during the hunt tomorrow, when many of the guests are occupied and the servants are busy with additional duties. Tomorrow. They were planning to murder Lydia within hours, and the casual efficiency of their planning revealed this was not their first such elimination of inconvenient witnesses. I thought of Marcus, trusting these men enough to meet with them privately, never suspecting that his honor and integrity had signed his death warrant. The conversation continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, covering details of their intelligence network, payment schedules, and future operations that would continue to betray English soldiers to their deaths on European battlefields. Every revelation added another layer to the horror of their crimes, but it was their discussion of my family that cut deepest. The elder Blackwood's shipping routes remain useful, Pemberton noted, consulting what appeared to be a ledger. His grief over Marcus has made him less attentive to business details, which serves our purposes admirably. We should be able to maintain our operations through his connections for at least another year before considering his elimination as well. My father, lost in mourning for his heir, had no idea that his business was being used to facilitate treason or that these family friends were planning his death as casually as they might plan a dinner party. The scope of their betrayal was so complete, so thoroughly evil, that I struggled to comprehend how I had lived my entire life without recognizing the monsters who had been sharing our table. Finally, after an eternity of whispered horrors, they began to conclude their meeting. The arrangements are settled then, the Duke said with satisfaction. The girl dies tomorrow during the confusion of the hunt, and young Garrett's unfortunate accident can be arranged within the week. The French will have their intelligence, we will have our payments, and the Blackwood family will cease to be a complication. As they prepared to leave, Pemberton paused near our hiding place, and for a terrifying moment I thought he had detected our presence. The curtains seemed inadequate protection against his searching gaze, and I could feel Lydia holding her breath beside me. But after a few seconds that felt like years, he simply extinguished the candle and followed his companions toward the door. Their footsteps faded into the distance, but we remained hidden for several more minutes, ensuring they had truly departed before emerging from our concealment. When we finally stepped back into the moonlit library, Lydia collapsed into one of the reading chairs, her composure finally cracking under the weight of what we had witnessed. "They're going to kill us both," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Tomorrow, during the hunt, and no one will ever know the truth about what happened to your brother or why we died." I knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in mine to steady their trembling. "Not if I can prevent it," I said, surprised by the conviction in my own voice. "We have the evidence, we know their plans, and we have something they don't expect, the knowledge of their intentions." But even as I spoke words meant to comfort her, I knew the magnitude of what we faced. 3 of the most powerful men in the county, with resources and connections that dwarfed anything I could bring to bear, were planning our deaths with the casual efficiency of men accustomed to eliminating obstacles. Our only advantages were surprise and the portfolio of evidence that Lydia had risked everything to preserve. Don't miss what happens next in this tale of love and courage, because the choice I made in that moonlit library would determine not only our survival but the fate of everyone I held dear. What happened next haunts me to this day. But it also taught me that sometimes the greatest victories require the greatest sacrifices, and that love can provide strength even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The hours between midnight and dawn passed in a blur of desperate planning and growing determination. Lydia and I retreated to the blue guest chamber where my brother had died, using the hidden compartment behind the false wall that she had mentioned in her note to conceal the evidence portfolio where it would be safe even if we did not survive the coming day. As we worked by candlelight to secure Marcus's legacy, I found myself studying her face, memorizing every detail of the woman who had shown more courage and honor than men with titles and power. The plan we devised was both simple and terrifyingly dangerous. During the morning hunt, when our enemies expected to eliminate Lydia in some staged accident, we would instead confront them publicly with the evidence of their treason. The risk was enormous, but the alternative was certain death followed by the continuation of their conspiracy and the eventual murder of my father. As dawn broke through the guest chamber windows, painting everything in shades of gold and rose, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours before. "Lydia," I said, taking her hands as the morning light revealed the exhaustion and fear in her beautiful gray eyes, "when this is finished, if we survive what's to come, I want you to know that my brother was not the only Blackwood capable of loving someone regardless of society's expectations." Her breath caught, and for a moment, the danger surrounding us seemed less important than the connection growing between us. "My lord," she whispered, "I could not ask you to sacrifice your position, your family's reputation, for someone of my station. But I was already beyond caring about social conventions or family expectations. 3 months ago, I returned from war believing that honor meant following the rules established by men of power and privilege. Now I understood that true honor meant protecting the innocent, pursuing justice regardless of personal cost, and recognizing worth in people rather than in titles or wealth. The morning hunt gathered on the east lawn of Ashbourne Manor as planned, with dozens of guests in their finest riding attire, eager for a day of sport and social interaction. I watched from my chamber window as the Duke, Pemberton, and Hartwell moved among the crowd with easy confidence, playing their roles as gracious hosts and family friends, while secretly planning murder and treason. When the hunting horn sounded and the party began moving toward the woods, Lydia and I put our plan into action. Instead of fleeing or hiding, we walked directly into the great hall where the remaining guests and household staff were preparing breakfast and managing the day's domestic arrangements. The portfolio of evidence was concealed beneath my hunting coat, and Lydia carried herself with the dignity of a duchess rather than a servant, her courage transforming her completely. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I have discovered evidence of treason and murder that demands immediate attention from every person of honor present." The reaction was immediate and varied. Some guests looked shocked, others intrigued, and a few seemed uncomfortable in ways that suggested they might have had their own suspicions about certain activities. But it was the expressions on the faces of our 3 conspirators that confirmed everything Lydia had revealed. Pemberton's face went pale, Hartwell's hand moved instinctively toward his sword, and the Duke's eyes fixed on Lydia with unmistakable murderous intent. "This is preposterous," Pemberton declared, attempting to regain control of the situation through bluster and social position. "Lord Garrett, your grief over your brother's loss has clearly affected your judgment. These wild accusations are beneath a gentleman of your standing." But I was prepared for their denials. From the portfolio, I withdrew the financial records showing payments from French agents, the correspondence detailing military intelligence, and most damning of all, Marcus's final letter describing his confrontation with the conspirators and his fears for his safety. "My brother discovered your treason," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "He confronted you with evidence of your betrayal of English soldiers and civilians to Napoleon's agents. You murdered him in this very house, then created the fiction of his diplomatic mission to France to cover your crimes." The assembled guests murmured among themselves as I presented document after document, each piece of evidence building an undeniable case against the three men who had seemed above suspicion. But it was Lydia's testimony that sealed their fate. "I witnessed Lord Marcus's murder," she declared, stepping forward with a courage that took my breath away. "I heard these men planning to dispose of his body and continue their intelligence operations using the Blackwood family's shipping connections. They have spent 3 months profiting from their treason while accepting the condolences of the family they betrayed." The Duke made one final attempt to salvage the situation through intimidation. "The word of a servant cannot be accepted against peers of the realm," he declared, but his voice lacked conviction, and several guests were already moving away from the three conspirators as if distance could protect them from the taint of association. "Then perhaps you'll accept the word of Colonel Harrison of His Majesty's Intelligence Service," came a voice from the hall's entrance. A tall, distinguished man in military uniform entered, flanked by a squad of soldiers whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. "I have been investigating French intelligence operations in England for the past 6 months, and the evidence presented here today confirms what we have long suspected about certain individuals' loyalty to the Crown." The arrest that followed was swift and decisive. Pemberton, Hartwell, and the Duke were taken into custody while their fellow guests watched in stunned silence, their shock giving way to outrage as they realized how completely they had been deceived by men they had trusted and respected. The evidence Lydia had preserved was handed over to Colonel Harrison, ensuring that justice would finally be served for Marcus and the countless soldiers who had died because of the conspirators' betrayal. But the true victory came later that afternoon, when the immediate crisis had passed and Lydia and I found ourselves once again in the ballroom where our story had begun. The autumn storm had finally cleared, leaving the sky bright and clean, and afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows to mix with the warm glow of fresh candles being lit for the evening. "The danger is over," I told her as we stood in the same spot where she had first whispered her shocking revelation about my brother. "Your courage saved not only our lives but countless others who would have suffered from their continued treason. And your willingness to believe me, to risk everything for justice and truth, proved that honor is not inherited but chosen," she replied, her hand finding mine as naturally as if we had been meant for this moment all our lives. The social obstacles that should have kept us apart seemed insignificant after what we had faced together. Love, I had learned, was not about matching social positions or family expectations but about finding someone whose courage, intelligence, and character complemented your own. When I proposed to Lydia in that candlelit ballroom 6 months later, after the trials had concluded and the conspirators had faced the full consequences of their crimes, no one who knew our story questioned the wisdom of our match. Our wedding took place in the spring, with Colonel Harrison serving as my groomsman and my father, finally understanding that true nobility comes from character rather than circumstance, walking Lydia down the aisle with tears of pride in his eyes. The ballroom at Ashbourne Manor, now under new ownership after the Duke's execution for treason, was transformed from a place of secrets and shadows into a celebration of love triumphing over every obstacle. As I write these words 20 years later, watching my children play in the garden while Lydia tends to her roses, I am reminded that the greatest victories often come from the most unexpected partnerships. My brother's death was avenged, England was protected from continued betrayal, and I discovered that love could be found in the most unlikely circumstances when courage and honor guide your choices. If this story has moved you, if you believe that love can conquer all odds and that justice is worth any sacrifice, then subscribe to hear more tales of romance, courage, and the triumph of the human heart over even the darkest circumstances. Because in the end, it is not our titles or our wealth that define us, but our willingness to stand up for what is right and to love without reservation when we find someone worthy of our devotion.